Hi, Hive. I'm waiting for the thing to quit doing that, and then I'll be sure that we're all here. I'm gonna wait a second. There we are. Hello, Hive. It is Thursday, and we're going on to the next segment of The Body Keeps the Score. And we are supposed to start around 4-ish, I say, but, being working at home with kids means that sometimes things like, Mommy, can we please make chocolate ooey gooey stuff that my kids accidentally poured almond extract into? So we'll see how this taste happens. And other times it means you come up to record a live and quickly move everything out of the way. This is actually what our bonus room looks like, so that's fun. Um, but here we'll make it look like it's pretty. So we are back, and just to give you an overview of how this is going to work, today this is sort of like a second soft start. So on Tuesday, Hillary got on and did this amazing video about trauma and about blood memory and gratitude. So if you haven't watched that, I think that would be a really good place to start. So I would actually pause and go back to that. And Hillary kind of lays the groundwork for the book that we're reading and talks about why we're reading it. Today we're going to talk about the prologue, and we're kind of starting this slowly because we realize with the quarantines and things like that, that some of the shipping processes are a little slower right now. So although I know a lot of people got their books, there were other people who were unable to get their books until early next week. So hi, Diane. Hi, Hillary. And of course, jump in and add things in the comments. I can see you. So that's awesome. So the prologue of this book is pretty short. So we're going to talk about what the book is about, why you might read it, and what he says in the prologue to kind of set the book up. So the Body Keeps the Score is about trauma. It is written to help people understand trauma, not only their own physical or emotional trauma, but it goes further than that to look at emotions and memories, and helps people who've had traumatic things happen to them think about those and process those, but also to help the rest of people who maybe don't have traumas or haven't identified past traumas yet to understand people who have, because we all know people who've gone through trauma. And one of the things that really stood out to me in the prologue was he talked about people who have experienced trauma who seem to repeat these cycles over and over again, where they try to start something and they can't finish, or they seem to find themselves in the same broken pattern that's very frustrating to the people from the outside. But because of trauma that they've experienced that they haven't been able to deal with in some of the ways he's going to talk about in this book, they're actually unable to move on. They're actually unable to healthily do certain things in their lives because of trauma. So in the prologue, he talks about the prominence of trauma. So some statistics that he gives. He says that 1 in 5 Americans have been sexually molested as a child. 1 in 4 were beaten by a parent to the point of a mark being left on their body. 1 in 3 couples engage in physical violence, and 1/4 of us grew up with alcoholic relatives. 1 out of 8 have witnessed their mother being beaten or hit. So when you look at those statistics, that probably covers almost all of us. So we've all had some trauma. And then he begins to talk a little bit about how that affects our families, and he begins his exploration with soldiers, which is where we're going to go into next week with the first chapter. But that's an easy one to start with, because you think about soldiers coming back from war or from doing things overseas. When they have PTSD from anything, it doesn't just affect them, it affects their families. When they have rage that they don't know what to do with, often their families are the recipients of that. And so you think about how that rage would then affect a child, and that child might not be able to trust, and then it goes on and on and on down the family line. He talks about the brain and how our brains and our physicality are all kind of linked together. And so feeling out of control is something that happens. It's a brain response to trauma. So what he says is there are three disciplines that are there to kind of help us understand the brain, trauma, abuse, and neglect. Because he says, you know, honestly, when you think about medicine and you think about the organs of the body, we know a lot about a lot of organs. We know when the kidney has suffered some kind of trauma or damage, we know what we're supposed to do. Largely, but the brain, there's so much that's unknown still. It's such a complex organ. And so he says that the disciplines that are helping us understand mental processes and the ones that we'll explore in this book are neuroscience, developmental psychopathology, and interpersonal neurobiology. So basically, the study of your brain and how it affects your mental processes, the study of the impact of adverse experiences on your brain and mind, and the study of how our behavior influences our emotions, biology, and the mindsets of those around us. And then he says that there are three avenues of therapy that will be explored in this book and that he and his team have explored. And he says that most people don't use one of these. They use some combination of all of these because one of them would on its own wouldn't stand. One of them on its own wouldn't provide a full amount of therapy. So you kind of think of, because I'm Episcopalian, I'm going to talk about stools for a second. In the Episcopal theology, we talk about a three-legged stool that kind of keeps us standing. I don't need to go into what that is, but anyway, so a stool must have at least three legs, right? Three or four. So his approach to therapy has three as well. One is top down, which is basically talking, like talk therapy. More complex than that, but basically talking. Two is medicine. And he says medicine is great and good, but you can't just do medicine because it may actually drown out your ability to further process your trauma. Yeah, and Hillary's saying these are just the things that have been reported. So those three disciplines that I mentioned, we're just scratching the surface. There's so much to learn about the brain. So there's talking, top down, two, medicine, and three, bottom down, allowing the body to feel. So Hillary was talking a little bit on Tuesday about yoga and breathing and things like that. So that this just scratches the surface as well. But these are the things that he's going to talk about in the book. But he says that the challenge is how can people gain control over the residues of past trauma and return to being masters of their own ship. Talking, understanding, and human connections can help. Drugs can dampen hyperactive alarm systems, but we'll also see that the imprints from the past can be transformed by having physical experience that directly contradict the helplessness, rage, and collapse that are all part of trauma, and thereby regain self-mastery. So that's what we're going to be doing in this book. So my questions for you today, as I lost my sticky note, oh no, what we're going to be doing in this book is going through all of these. We'll do 2 chapters on Tuesdays, 2 on Wednesdays. But my question for you is really today, as you get ready to start this book, why are you here? Why do you want to read this book? What are you hoping to gain from it? What interests you? Is it about you personally? Do you have a trauma that you're hoping to kind of have this book help you sort through? Is it because there's other people in your family who've had traumas? Is it because you're just interested? Is it because you have a family history of trauma? Just curious what you're interested in from this book. So that's the first question. The second question is, you know what, we kind of mentioned this on Tuesday, what kind of traumas might we actually be experiencing now that we might be able to be aware of enough to start to practice things that will keep us grounded? I don't know if that question makes sense, but thinking about, we mentioned last week kids, that our kids could walk away from this COVID thing traumatized because they're not in school, their parents are stressed. But what are some things that we can do to maybe keep it from being such a trauma or to process it so that we don't hide it and pass it on down the family line. So, maybe you do things like make really gross chocolate stuff. But so what are some things there? And then Hillary has some great comments here. She says, all too often in the West, we turn only to the medicine treatments and ignore the body and spirit, which is certainly something we're going to talk about. Again, that's just one of the parts, medicine. When we only use medicine, there's not, you don't address the whole problem. So I come from a teaching background, and you think of a child, it's so easy to use ADHD as an example, but I'm going to. When you just medicate a child with ADHD, that's a fantastic, important thing to do for some people, certainly, but that's not the only thing that you do. There are behavior modifications, and not just for the child, but also for the parents and for the teacher. And then there's understanding certain things that maybe need to change environmentally. There are certain things that the child might need to do physically to help themselves focus as well. So that's just an example. Hillary says, I think we're all in a trauma at the moment, remembering how this is held in the body and how we can integrate that is why I'm glad we're diving into this book. Being honest and naming our feelings is so helpful. Yeah. I'm gonna, my kids are screaming. I'm gonna ramble for another minute or two so that people can jump on and say things, and certainly you can comment on this later. But one of the things for me personally that's come to mind, and I'm glad that we're reading this book, is as we're living through this COVID thing, I've seen how it's affecting my body. So in my personal family history, we have a history of psoriasis, which is a skin disease. But depending on your family history, depending on your stress levels, depending on how much, the luck of the genetic draw, it can simply be a skin thing. It can really be a bad skin thing, or it can turn into arthritis. And that's something that's part of my family history that I've been able to largely avoid until this, and all of the stress of what's happening in the world right now. I have extreme joint pain and was just diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, which stinks. But I really think it has a lot to do with what's going on right now. Is it just what's going on right now? No, it's a collision of things. And so I think we all kind of are dealing with those different things. Let's see. Hillary says she has brain fog and exhaustion, totally, which is a sign of trauma, right? And thanks. And Diane says she's hoping to see if it helps her with all the craziness. Yeah, it's super crazy right now. So I think a lot of people are excited about this book for that reason. So going forward, what we'll do is, if you have questions, favorite parts, quotes, or things you just really want to make sure that we explore in the book, if you could get that to us like Monday-ish, to kind of give me some time to process it and put it together, like by Monday night, that would be fantastic. And I also have a study guide for us, so that if you haven't read it, it's okay, because I'll give a brief summary with like the 3 or 4 main points of it, and then we'll kind of dive in and give ourselves some questions to explore, and we'll kind of go from there. So if that sounds like a good plan, that's what we'll do. So Tuesday, the reading schedule is up, but Tuesday we will read the first and second chapter. So we will talk about lessons from Vietnam veterans in chapter 1. And then chapter 2 is revolutions in understanding mind and brain. So pretty excited about that. So send in your questions on Monday night. Hop online whenever you can. This comment thing stays up, so add your comments and tell us why you're here. What do you want to benefit from in this book? Thanks, everybody.